Hi, welcome to part 4 of our series. This one's called Rebuilders of Cities. Isaiah 61 verse 4 is what we're focusing on. Isaiah begins by prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem, and then later parts of he talks about the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the restoration of Jerusalem. And in the Bible, we've got 4 books in the Bible that deal with this. Ezra, which is the story of the rebuilding of the temple. Haggai and Zechariah, prophets, during that time, in Nehemiah. So it's really interesting to see what happens, because this passage has an historical context, but also is talking about us, because this is a kingdom poem. So in terms of historical context, about 400 years after King Solomon built the temple, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, came along and destroyed it, carried off the Jews into captivity. Then, about 70 years later, the Persians came, defeated the Babylonians, and ruled over the area. Cyrus, who was a good king, not a believer, but a good king, he allowed those who had been taken into exile to go back. And so he sent the Jews back from Babylon to their homeland to rebuild the temple. And that's the story of Ezra. But another 70 years later, another king, who's still the Persian ruler, he allowed Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the city walls. So these words do prophetically link to history. But how they relate to us? Well, if you look at the sort of the movement within the book of Isaiah, you get to the end of Isaiah, from Isaiah starting out specifically talking about Jerusalem. But then by the time you get to the end of Isaiah, there's this bigger picture. There's hints of the, well, not hints, but there's clear references to the Messiah. But you get to Isaiah 65 and 66, and clearly we're talking about the kingdom to come. And Isaiah 65 sets out a picture of what a city would be like under, in a sense, God's rule, God's original design. And from it, scholars have drawn some markers of what a healthy city would look like. There would be a healthy sense of community. There'd be physical health, vibrant neighbourhoods, sustainable living. There'd be enjoyable and rewarding work. There'd be safe community, and there'd be unhindered communion with God. Now, three out of four of those markers, anybody would say, yeah, that's what we want. That's what we want. So how does the church fit in with this? Well, when we look at the historical context of the rebuilding of Jerusalem, we have a bit of a model of how we can see cities rebuilt. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls with the support of Ezra. Ezra rebuilt the temple with active support of Nehemiah. The reality is that church leaders and pastors can't lead city transformation, but we can actively support the well-being of the city. We need Ezra leaders who have a vision for the city, but we equally need Nehemiahs, men and women of faith who see their calling as far greater than just coming to church on Sunday. Some people say, well, the church shouldn't be involved in city affairs. Well, I think that one of the lessons from Jeremiah, where Jeremiah 29 verse 7, where God says, I want you to bless the city that God has placed you in, is a key lesson for us today. Absolutely insightful. Have a look at the notes. There's some really interesting story about Haggai and the new temple, and it relates to people's attitudes today. People think, what is the point in being involved in city stuff? Because God's going to come, he's going to create this new kingdom, so what's the point? But we are still to work today. We are still called to work. Even though this is a shadow, in a sense, of what is to come, we are to work today. Jesus said to pray, may your kingdom come. We are to work today for his kingdom, and that affects every area of life. So what's the role of the church? What's the role of us in rebuilding? If this is a poem that's talking about the kingdom, we are the rebuilders of cities. How are we involved? Well, one is to be a united church in the city. As a united church, we can more effectively work to bring influence. I think families play a key role in rebuilding neighbourhoods. Strong families can influence neighbourhoods for the good. I think we're called to persistently pray for the city. Often our prayers are focused on other stuff, ourselves and the church. What about praying into the city? specifically for some of the key needs. Because God's heart, God loves the city. Fourthly, we are to serve the poor alongside the agencies that are doing that. Now, we can't meet all the practical needs of the city. There's heaps of great agencies doing that, but we can partner with some of them and work alongside them, supporting them in what they do. And we're to equip, the church can equip believers for the workplace. We need to find the Nehemiahs who are in places of influence that can make a difference. And you, regardless of your workplace, can make an influence, a kingdom influence in your workplace. And I suggest some ideas on that. Later this year, September the 12th, we're going to have a Sunday of service, where instead of meeting and doing our normal worship, we're going to have breakfast together, a brief time of prayer and worship, then we're going to go out and serve in lots of different ways. It's like Clean and Green, but an expanded version and on a Sunday. Because we want service to be part of the DNA of our church. We want everyone to realise that worship is far more than just what we do, singing songs for an hour. You might think that this kingdom, this city building stuff is sort of all pie in the sky beyond me. But this is saying, no, God has placed a far greater purpose on your life than just surviving and living for pleasure. It's actually to make a difference, to be a kingdom influence in the city and where God has placed you. I pray you challenge each other to think, how can I go about doing that? May God bless.